Welcome to the Development Fireside Chat. So I'm joined with distinguished colleagues, Amanda and Dial, and why don't we get this particular session is going to focus more on the development part of a startup lifecycle journey. So we'll talk about products, MVPs, concept to those, regulatory pathways, and the like, and then have some fun along the way. So I'll let just my friends, Amanda, why don't you kick us off? Just tell us a little bit about your background and about the company.
Sure, thank you. So my background is not in business, big shocker. I actually went to school. I've been a respiratory therapist for over 20 years. And so looking and seeing things from a clinical perspective, seeing issues, I think the last award winner kind of put everything in perspective. Clinically, for innovation, we are handcuffed by some regulation and some billables from CMS, and the way that you can actually kind of pull that through. So I started my first company in 2012. It was a service-based company that rolled into the need for equipment, and I started a distribution company in 2014. But as part of that distribution company, I was invited to participate in the USC Tech Incubator. And I joined there, knowing that there were a couple of problems that I'd seen clinically I'd wanted to work on with regards to technology, but it was still pretty early. And so I had an opportunity to work with some USC professors with a capstone project and a group of interns to develop our proof of concept for PulManage. And then we took and rolled that was in 2018, we took that product and then rolled it out into its own corporation in 2020.
So everybody, I'm Devaney. I started Infinity Collar in 2019. I come from South Carolina. I grew up here, went to Clemson. I joined the off-road club when I was there. And one of the things about the off-road club at Clemson is that everybody has dogs. So I ended up getting a dog my sophomore year. And during the off-road trips, everybody likes to let their dogs out at the campsite, run around. And while we're off-roading, they usually keep their dogs in the car. But when I was off-roading, my dog didn't like riding in the car. It's very bumpy, as you might imagine, when you're off on the trails. And so I'd let her run outside the car beside me, the Jeep. And so what I found was that when you have a hunting dog and you're in the woods and you're driving a Jeep and they see a squirrel, they're gone really fast. So I started looking for solutions to keep my dog in my proximity, and nothing really existed, so here we are.
When you think about it, a lot of people those of us that have animals, that's a certainly common issue. Well, now you've passed the ideation phase, so now you're looking at development. Talk us through how you got from concept to product to this MVP, this minimum viable product, and the journey, what that was like. Amanda, you want to go?
I'll go first. So the MVP and the concept came from that initial opportunity I had with the capstone students from USC. What I wanted at that time, I was working as a consultant with another large respiratory company, and I was working on their asthma problem. And so we built the initial concept, or the proof of concept for PulManage was really asthma specific. But what I found was that when we wanted to roll that out into a product, there's a lot of kind of noise with regards to telemedicine, and some of the billables weren't established there at that time. And so we kind of pulled back and decided to hold a little bit on that project. But I think that the timing was great. The pulling back allowed myself and my team to really begin to assimilate, and it allowed us to really kind of look at what we wanted for a commercial product moving forward.
Al, how about you?
So for our MVP, like I said, I had this idea back in college, and I was looking for a solution. It was at the time 2017, and that's not that long ago. I had kind of just assumed that this technology existed, that I could go buy some sort of portable containment device for my dog. And so I really just started looking. I was trying to buy a product, and then it didn't exist. And so I studied industrial engineering in school. I figured I could probably make something work, and I bought a competing product, or a product that was similar to what I was trying to do enough. And then I wrote some software and was able to create basically the first prototype myself by just buying another product and then writing some software that overlaid on top of that. And it created the first portable, or truly portable wireless dog fence. And then after that, I had a lot of people asking me if they could buy one. And at the time, I couldn't sell somebody else's product and overlay my software on top of it to provide that product. So I got a business partner at Clemson. Person I met my freshman year actually ended up being in a couple classes together. He was a double E, computer science, and we, through him, were able to get a connection with one of our PhD students at Clemson, and we hired him to help build our first from scratch product, not product, but prototype rather. That was a long process. It took about 1.5 years to get, your first. We're basically building a cell phone. This thing it's got a computer, it's got a cell chip, it's got a GPS chip, it's got LoRa, it's got Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and we're integrating all of that, and then, adding software on top to do the fencing and whatnot. So we're really building a pretty complex contraption. So this next iteration of the prototype with Simeon, PhD student, was really good, and for college students, it was affordable. But then we ran into some more issues. You find that, the architecture of that system just isn't up to par for real-time dog fencing, and we were able to prove out and suss out a lot of our software, a lot of our algorithms. We could tell everything works properly from a functional perspective, but we needed a better prototype. And at the time, we had filed for our patent through Kim and Leahy, and then I think we got our connection to SCRA, and they were able to help us, one, with funding, and two, with connections with another in-house prototyper in the South Carolina area. And that's where we've been for the past. So the first prototype was about a year process. That was the one that I built. And the second prototype was about 1.5 year process. And then we were able to test that one out. And then this last prototype that we've been developing has been about 1.5 years as well. And we actually just finished the hardware 2 months ago or so. And we're continuing to move forward on that development from a firmware perspective, and we already have all of our software written. So it's been a pretty long journey, and you can see the steps we've gone through different prototype developers and different designs, but we're getting there.
So sort of just continue on that line. Dow, can you think of any times that you had to pivot during that process from concept all the way to full production of the product? And if so, what was that like?
Yeah, so my timeline, I don't know if I'm going to put it together, but our timeline kind of puts us right in the middle of COVID during our first from scratch prototype development process. And so we had actually raised some money through the Spark Challenge at Clemson that we put towards the patent, and then that put us towards hiring Simeon to develop that hardware prototype, and we had hired some people to work on the software as well. Well, actually, we ended up, that was 2020, and our software developer did not make it through that year. So that was quite a pivot for one, obviously very sad, but don't put all your eggs in one basket. So the next step we made was our software development turned into a team. So instead of having one person where everything is in one basket, now we have a team of software people. So anything can get picked up where it's left off, and they all know each other. So if there's any, I don't know if anybody here has written software, but generally you don't kill or stop a project in the middle and have somebody else pick it up, because you don't write half an essay and then have somebody else write the rest of your essay, right? So now we have people who are in communication all the time, and there's never a single point of failure for that.
Yeah, good point. Amanda, how about you? Any pivots along the way?
Yeah, so I kind of to go back to what our proof of concept was versus our MVP product. I thought we were going to talk a little bit about a regulatory piece, and so I'll just kind of bring that up. When I was going through it and working through that initial proof of concept, I have in my head, I know what this needs to be. I have the roadmap kind of built out. Part of the problem is that it's in my head, and I have to communicate that to other people. But another issue that we ran into is the regulatory binding pieces. And so with the advancement of telemedicine, the FDA has, they have a term called the software as a medical device. And so understanding what that looked like, SCRA was pretty instrumental in helping me to connect with an FDA consultant and understand what does that roadmap look like? What does our actual MVP need to be? Do we want to go to market with an MVP prior to an FDA submission? So we had a lot of really difficult decisions to make. COVID helped to fast track that for us quite a bit. We participated with the University of South Carolina with some studies on COVID-specific patients. I guess I should tell you a little bit about my product. My product is a remote patient monitoring tool. So we connect a patient's lung function from an FDA-cleared medical device in through our application and share that information real time with the medical team in conjunction with their symptoms. So it's really helpful clinically to understand when you pair those two pieces together. How is my patient doing? You kind of take their temperature, where they're at as far as their therapeutic status, and when you can see a trend begin to develop as they become, as they get sicker, either from COVID or from their chronic lung disease. So.
And along those lines, as a follow-up, so the regulatory pathway that you're doing is your counsel is in getting involved with the FDA early in the process of product development.
That's correct. So right now we're in a pre-FDA submission status. We've chosen to take our MVP to market prior to having the FDA 510K for the software, but we are basically right up against the line of what the FDA says. They keep moving the bar for software as a medical device, so I know that we're functionally right up, kind of butting up against that, but the device that we utilize and interface and collect some of that clinical data with, that has the 510K. So our strategy was really we were actually kind of confused about how to go about this, and received some really good counsel from our consultants and some advisors at SCRA. And so what we've chosen to do is to submit early on prior to hitting that threshold that requires a software as a medical device, 510K, so that as we're developing and releasing pieces of the product and our roadmap, our analytical piece and that predictive algorithm piece that we're working on, we can then use ourselves as a predicate for our second submission. So they'll just kind of make it go a little bit faster and be a little cleaner submission.
Yeah, sounds a smart thing to do. Dial, how about you? Any regulatory issues for you?
That sounds terrible.
It's not fun, no.
Yeah, so we have a wireless device, so we have to register with the FCC. That's about it.
There you go. Let me, to just build off of what you talked about in terms of product development and regulatory issues there, when do you feel like it's the right stage to engage potential customers? And just walk us through when that was and what the feedback was and how you iterated your product as a result of those.
So I had engaged customers or potential customers literally from day one, from the idea phase. Again, I was working as a consultant with a large respiratory company out of Tennessee, and they had this problem. They were trying to figure out how to engage patients from home, and so I was able to kind of test some of my ideas. And they really encouraged me and said, you should go forward with this capstone project thing. Let's see what happens. And so I think just the support of my peers from the medical community has been really helpful, but understanding what it looks like in the acute care facility to take care of these patients as a bedside clinician, and then on the outpatient side, both at the bedside and at the administrative level, understanding some of those things. So I call on my peers often to test out ideas and to look at, like, if I did this, would you like this? Or if could it or should it do something else that I haven't thought of? And my medical director, a very good friend of mine for many years and incredibly supportive, he brought forward some ideas that we really hadn't thought about with regards to COPD. So when we made kind of the push from that proof of concept into what our MVP product would be, we were told by our SCRA advisor, Amanda, you're going to have a beachhead. When you pitch this thing, you're going to have to be able to tell the story. And so it was easy for me to select that beachhead with regards to chronic lung disease. Because if you say chronic lung disease, you're talking about hundreds of millions of people. But we need to kind of get laser focused and focus on a specific portion of that chronic lung disease to then be able to grow and earn the right to grow. So we really selected COPD. So COPD's got a huge misdiagnosis problem here in the United States, about 70%. It affects about 30 million people, and it costs taxpayers about $50 billion a year. So it's a huge problem, but it's really near and dear to my heart. As a respiratory therapist, I went to school. I left and walked away from a full ride music scholarship to go to a community college to become an RT very early on, right out of high school, because my grandmother had COPD. And so I was her caregiver, and I experienced that personally. And kind of fast forward 20 plus years, COPD disproportionately affects women. And so I'm a woman, I want to take good care of other women, and so I feel like that's what our product is. That's the goal that we're pushing toward. We want them to understand how to recognize symptoms, how to be diagnosed early, and how to maintain quality of life. And I probably went way over what you asked for, but
it's all good. Dal, how about you?
Yeah, so for consumer testing, I would say, or just feedback from users, potential users, we've done a fair amount in the software space. So my background was human ergonomics and industrial design. So we've done with our application, we've done user testing. That's kind of how it's gotten developed into what it is today. We started off with just some Adobe XD panels that I put together for what the application might look like, and then sent that out to 50 people. And then since then, we've hired the first software developer. We've hired a team of software developers, and now we have a whole application built out. We've based our website off of that. And as far as the actual handheld itself, I've been using that in the field, since 2017. I get feedback all the time from people with what they would like to see or what they like about it, and that's been integrated into our product. So basically what we've ended up developing is, on our last prototype iteration, it was, I'll call it semi-functional. It was fully functional from a software and it working perspective, but it had some latency issues, so it wasn't really field testable. But our previous unit was field testable, so we kind of had 1, 2, and 3, and field testable, not field testable, and this next one is going to be field testable. But we're able to take all of that and move it into this next one, which we then added additional functionality in. So this new prototype that we finished up 2 months ago, writing the firmware now. The software's already written, so once the firmware is implementable, we'll be testing that later this year. We kind of have this extremely capable device, and our intention is that's kind of going to be the flagship product, right? But we intend to test out other simpler use cases, because in the retail space, not everybody has $1,000 to spend on a dog collar. So to go back to user testing, we will use this flagship product to suss out potential other simplified use cases where we might find untapped value.
So your goal is to, when you get to that phase where you've got an MVP, is to create, would you call them focus groups, or selected individual to do that product testing and then go back and reiterate?
That's exactly right. So we'll be looking for particular markets that maybe don't have as much technology and innovation in the pet space, we might be able to take advantage. So, like, for example, 2 of those might be glamping has gotten popular in the past few years. People have a lot more accessibility to enjoying their time in nature, and so that's potentially something we might focus on a market of people who like to do that and get out in nature. Maybe they don't need the full capability of the flagship model, but they could get away with a miniaturized version, or possibly some sort of right now we've been focused on taking your dog camping, taking your dog hiking, taking your dog out and about, going to your house, your parents' house, wherever it may be, and you need a fence there. Well, what if we're not outside, and what if we're inside? What if you want to do something in your house? So indoor fencing, if you will. Those are just the two things we may refine into once we have our flagship to do some niche market testing.
Yeah. So you had mentioned where you had early on in kind of your product development, you had an issue where you talked about putting all your eggs in one basket with development. Can you talk a little bit about, both of you, about the involvement of your teams? Who primarily is responsible for doing that initial customer discovery, product development, getting it to an MVP? And then what suggestions would you give to other founders about changes you might make in the makeup of that team to get it to an MVP?
So my team is incredibly technical. The majority of them are kind of on that side of the fence. One of my co-founders is an engineer. And so they're really more focused on the product side of things. So myself and then my medical director and some of my colleagues are really kind of the front line for customer discovery and understanding and communicating needs. We take that back and talk to the tech team. But it's been really interesting. So I a couple of times I had my team, because they didn't understand some of the things and the reasons for why are you asking me to do it this way, Amanda, when it could be done easier this way, because it's more sustainable, clinically speaking. So to introduce them and have some of those conversations across my team to the customer, and then embracing the patient experience. So we've spent a lot of time and energy with focus groups, both for the provider side and the patient side of our platform, looking to understand what's the best UI. If I'm a doctor, if you make me click 2 more times in my EMR, I might scream at you, especially after COVID. These guys are just really pressed to the wall pretty much every day. So understanding what kind of workflow that they would tolerate, and then understanding what kind of technology will a patient engage with. Most COPD patients are over 45. They're not always the higher income. And so understanding what their health literacy is, what kind of big words can I use or not use in my application? How do I provide instruction to them? How do I engage them? How do I keep them engaged so that they will continue to use my product and benefit their medical team? So really important, but my team is incredibly technical, and I couldn't do any of the smart, cool things in this product without them. And so their input and understanding the cloud-based infrastructure and some of the architecture that's required for us to be able to grow and scale, they've been just instrumental in really getting us to the point that we're at and ready to move on to that next step with our first customers.
Lee, would you mind saying that again? I didn't really understand exactly.
Yeah, so the question was about when you look at product development and you're building a team to be able to build that product, who are you, when you bring on those people, are you bringing on engineers, and who has responsibility for the final say in those features that get done in the product, and how do you do that? How do you look at building your team for products?
Yeah, so I'll say in my space, because we're developing this technical device, it's very complex. And so, the most important part to me is making sure that it functions properly and making sure that we can build it and develop it. And so finding that person who has that skill set to build a device that has all of these components and then add the firmware on top and integrate it with software is difficult. And that's why we said our first one was a PhD student. So finding him to be able to build that minimum viable product or minimum viable prototype was difficult but doable. And then it took finding SCRA and their resources to find our next prototype developer who had another skill set who could really take it to the next level. And those skill sets are few and far between. For me, I am overarching on that team. I'm overarching on the software team, and then I'm facilitating all the communications and making sure that all plays to get into the user, their experience, their UI. And then we engage with a marketing team to help us develop all those materials and make sure that they can kind of translate what we've put together from a software perspective throughout what we decide is best for us to reach our target audience. And so I would say that it's up to you as the CEO or the founder to make sure that you're following the direction you set forth, and that everybody else gets that message. And you can inspire them to create things how it's envisioned and how you agree it's envisioned.
Can I pitch back in? So, you talk about marketing and different pieces. So PulManage is still, we have our first customers, and we're still just a group of founders basically running this thing. So we all wear a lot of hats, and it's how many hats can you wear, but it's what resources you have access to. So my other company, I have full-time employees that I can push things and responsibilities off on. So some of the marketing pieces I can sub out and utilize the resources that I have access to. But I want to just kind of shout out to my advisory board, because they have been phenomenal. Understanding, again, I went to school to take care of sick people. And so running a company, there's some learning curves there, and understanding what it looks like to go after capital. Because I didn't really have to do that with my other two companies. I was able to self-fund and cash flow almost from day one with those models. So this is a tremendously different piece, but never underestimate the power of a strong advisor. And if you don't know someone, ask. LinkedIn is your friend, and be sure to ask them for the next introduction, because your network is really what's going to pull you together to help you build your team, and to be able to launch a successful product.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that real quick. Just keeping your eyes open for opportunity, because I wouldn't have gotten here if I hadn't applied to the Spark Challenge at Clemson and gotten associated with the leader of that organization that put us in contact with Doug and Kim Leahy, that put us in contact with Steve, that put us at SCRA, and we wouldn't be anywhere. So just keeping your eyes open to opportunity for networking and improving your network is, everybody knows it's not what you know, it's who you know, right?
Both of you raised a really good point, the value of the ecosystem to support you. Can you go into a little bit more detail what you talked about, just the fact that thankfully SCRA and certainly Steve and others, who has really been impactful in this growth of your stage, and what would you like to see differently from the ecosystem that you haven't been getting?
So a couple of people have been really pivotal. You would be at the top of my list, but Will Cruz has been phenomenal. Prior to Will, my previous advisor, I think, retired from SCRA, so I've had 3 advisors as a launch company, which is a little bit frustrating, right? You have to get to know somebody. You go through this almost dating phase, right? You understand what their business model is, what problem they're working on, how can I help you, all of those things. But, Bob has been great, and I've spoke with him at events throughout the years, and just meeting the team and kind of pulling together, asking questions. But Will has been really instrumental. He also helped me to pull together folks that I needed on my advisory board. We looked at kind of our business canvas and what markets are we going to go after, and what specific, kind of key people do you need to have to tap on the shoulder and ask about, tell me about the private payer, the Medicaid space, or the private payer space. Tell me about the post-acute space. And so just having someone to kind of hold your hand and walk you through that, and teach you some fundamental business practices. Again, very different in the investment community and understanding those things. I didn't have to do that with my other companies. I was able to self-fund. So understanding some of those kind of do's and don'ts they've been really helpful to me.
Yeah, I think that Clemson was really helpful for us. They gave us a lot of resources from the first money we ever got for the company outside of our own was from Clemson. When I was on the rugby team at Clemson, and we got to use their field and their facilities for product testing when we were there. So those 2 things alone, and that helped us generate content that helped us in presentations moving forward, and raising funds, those types of presentations. And then, SCRA has been absolutely fantastic to work with. And just everything from it's really been step by step, but Clemson obviously that includes the rugby team, and then to the people that connected us to SCRA, to the people they've connected us with from a development perspective, has just been, I can't.
I want to tap one more group that we didn't really talk about, the other founders. So I was a member of the Tech Incubator for a number of years, and just to be surrounded by people who are going through the same kind of struggle that you are, even if it's just to commiserate over a cup of coffee or a beer after work, is incredibly helpful. You can ask questions, and they're helpful. They're great, and they'll introduce you to someone in their network. And I was actually introduced to Lee from one of my neighbors there at the incubator. But people are your biggest asset. They're sometimes the most frustrating piece that you have to deal with too. But just having your network, whether it's in your team, whether it's on your advisory board, or whether it's in the community, is really important.
Yeah, you raise a good point, because it really does. It takes a village, right? You hear the term, to really build a successful startup. So it's great to hear that. On the notion of just the product development, getting back to that piece, what would be your advice for the other founders about using contractors versus in-house? I'm interested in kind of where you land on that, because it's a critical piece when you have to get that product done and developed.
So I'm a mixed bag. I've used contractors, but I've also used internal developers. I will tell you that contractors you have to double check everything they do. You need to have somebody on your tech team that can really walk behind them and make sure that they're delivering what you have asked them to deliver. But they can get stuff done, and they can accelerate your timeline. However, it might not be the same quality that you're going to produce in-house. And so that, in my tech team, that's actually a struggle that we pull, kind of give and take. What are our resources? How much funding do we have? How fast can I get this pushed out? What's our next inflection point? And you just have to make a decision, I think, internally, what would be best for you and where you are on your roadmap.
Yeah, I think that comes down to also the type of company you have and what your product is and what you're looking to get out of whoever you're hiring, right? So from my perspective, we need to develop this product, right? We know the functionality, we know our objective, and it would probably be extremely expensive from either a financing or an equity perspective if I was to bring somebody on and say, hey, I've got this idea, build this, right? Like they'd say, all right, I want 75% of the company, because they're building it. But from my perspective, if you can hire a contractor to do X, Y, Z, you defined it, and then it costs this many dollars, and yep, that makes sense, I'm going to hire a contractor for that, in my opinion. So that's what we've done, right? So PhD Simeon, he was a contractor. Our current contract with Tim, who's developing our hardware who finished developing our hardware 2 months ago, that was a contract employment. From an internal perspective, there's only 3 of us, and we don't develop the hardware. So we're not going to be. That's just not kind of our business plan. So that's kind of, I think if you think the value is there, if it's not an ongoing thing, software, that would be somebody I might bring somebody onto the team for. So
my company is a software company, and I will tell you that you're never done with software, ever. And when you are asking, whether it be your team internally or whether it be a contractor, you need to know what the deliverable it is. It needs to be hard and fixed, because in your mind as a founder, if you're like me, I'm already about 10 clicks ahead of you, and so I feel like we should be further down here. And then I look and I'm like, that's all you did? Well, but what about this? And so you can't allow the bar to move. Just really set those clear expectations from day one.
And on those expectations, most importantly, well, not most importantly, but very importantly, timeline. When are you giving me this?
Yes, a clear, defined statement of work, and what is your deliverable, and what is your due date? Because at least my experience internally and externally, a lot of software developers work really straight up to that deadline. So when you get when you get something delivered to you early, you get a little bit nervous. And you want to look at the back end and be like, let's just make sure we didn't miss anything. But again, that was from a contractor.
You made a really good point about setting clear expectations about deliverables and then managing to those expectations, having regular communication with the contractor, making sure he or she is delivering what you expect him to do. So if you had to do anything differently on the product development side, what would you do? Anything at all? What recommendations do you have for kind of the founders in that regard?
Yes. I would do a lot different, but I would, looking back and understanding the circumstances that we were dealt, I may not have done anything different either. I chose to slow down and really focus on kind of that UI experience, both for the patient and the provider, knowing that, there are some competitions chugging ahead, but I want to get it right. Because I want to have a sustainable product. With regards to software, at least in the medical community and telemedicine, there are companies that are here today and gone tomorrow, and I don't want my company to be that way. I want to make a difference, to build a quality product that makes impact. And so I slowed down quite a bit on some of our development. Again, I needed some feedback, and you need to understand which way the market's swerving. Healthcare has changed so much in the last 3 years. We might not have been having this conversation 3 years ago because just the billable, reimbursable side wasn't available. Patients and people in the general public were not as accepting of technology and remote care, and so I think that you just need to understand where you're at and understand what mission you're marching your team toward to make some of those decisions. So, yeah, my answer is yes.
I don't know. So this is my first company, and I'm still learning and growing and developing in the company and everywhere. And I think that there's been a lot of tribulations, but we've had a pretty steady path. There's a chance that we could have done something differently, but realistically, back when we are starting, we're more limited on funds back then. So it wasn't like we had a lot of optionality. It was more of we need to get to this point. How do we do that? And this is the minimum resources it takes. Let's get there. So I don't know if I would do anything differently. It'd be nice to come up here and say, I would do this differently, and then I would already be a millionaire, right? I would already be selling product. But I'm not sure that there's any particular steps that I could have done differently, except for learning about SCRA faster. Then that would have really put me in a different position. I think that looking back, it's not really been too long of a time. I mean, it's been long if you think it is, but if you look at 2 prototypes in 3 years, that's pretty decent. And I think that we're on a good path to launching the product when I think we will. And no, I don't think that I really. If I said yes, I'd have to give a why, right? I don't have a reason that I would change anything.
Well, that's a fair point because you still have a ways to go in your journey. So that's totally understandable. So a couple more questions, and then we'll try to open it up to the audience so you get a chance to ask some questions as well. What would you see as your greatest challenge as far as you're in this stage of development, you're ready to launch and to grow, to start to get revenue and customers? What do you see as your biggest obstacle to get to the next step?
People and capital, right? Knowing who and how and when to bring that team member on, having the capital to support them. I think one of the other founders from the previous Fireside chat mentioned, what keeps you up at night, and what keeps you up at night is how I'm going to pay for that. I have people that are on my team, and I'm responsible for them and for their family, for their livelihood, and so I don't take that responsibility lightly. And so I've chosen to kind of just wait, and at some point you're going to have to step out. But those are the 2 things, I think: people and money.
I'm very jealous of you, Amanda. You have a software company. You don't have to worry about I'm just kidding. But my biggest challenge.
I have a lot to worry about.
No. My biggest challenge, I think, is is going to be margins. So, in my back of my mind all the time is, how am I going to make this and sell it at a price point that's going to really drive business? Because there's products out there that are in that price point, and they drive, and they're successful companies, but being a successful company is not easy. So I think we really need to, that's what I, in the back of my mind, is constantly, how are we making sure that we're providing enough value to justify the cost of this product? And so that's my biggest thing, and that comes to the product development from a flagship model to wherever else you go. It's just important for me, to keep that in mind.
That's a good point, because price is a critical issue to be able to what kind of value do you deliver? So to follow on to that, when you look at to be able to get the product out to the market, what steps are you taking to kind of get to the next phase for your company?
So I will say that one thing that we haven't talked too much about is about industry partnerships, and I have some really strong industry partners that have made connections for us to customers. So if you're in the medical space, please never discount what's happening with regards to medical research and clinical trials. There is an insane amount of capital and funding available on that side of the table, but on the corporate healthcare side, we're really kind of hamstringed somewhat by what CMS or the Medicare folks basically allot as billables for us. So to get to those customers, just having relationship out in the industry, networking has been incredibly important. Again, people are really important, and who you surround yourself with is incredibly important.
So I've got a connection that I've made over the past year with a leader in the pet industry who's he kind of managed the acquisition of one of the largest pet wearables in the industry, Whistle. And so he's kind of, like back to the people connections. I've been, working with him, not working, but communicating with him, facilitating for when we have a product launch. He'll hopefully be a part of that, help us launch bigger. Obviously, manufacturing is something we have to worry about, so manufacturing is something we're working on. And then just other things we haven't really focused on up until this point. Marketing is something that we haven't really focused on because we haven't had something to market, right? But now we're getting to the point where we're going to have something to market very soon. So we've been working on the foundations of building what does the company look like from a marketing perspective. Outside of just what product does it offer, what else are you communicating to your consumers in the market? And so that's what we've been working on.
So partners that believe in you, that will do things for you. Last year, one of my partners that from the actual FDA device that we have interfaced into our software, they took me kind of on a road tour with them to Boston and to San Francisco. So I was able to get in front of customers and prospective partners, again, other businesses, and to see what the opportunity was, really to know where to go and attack our marketing efforts. So again, people are really, really imperative. So relationships are critical to success.
As you're talking, Amanda, I wonder, before we go to questions from the audience, if you would mind sharing just a little bit about what you and I talked about and some of the challenges with you as a woman entrepreneur. It's an area that we take very seriously. We should, certainly for our state, but I just wonder if you would mind sharing some of your thoughts.
Yeah, so as a lady, I've been a member of SCRA for a number of years, but and I do a lot with regards to starting Women's in Respiratory as a LinkedIn group that I've started to try to help support some of my colleagues. But I think it's scary to sit on this stage and know that there are 20 presenters today and only 2 of us are women. And then one begins to ask themselves why. Is it because women have different challenges? Absolutely. God created us totally different. We're hardwired different than our male counterparts for a reason. But, do we not have enough women starting companies? Do we have women that need just some support to help them, encourage them to take the next step and say, you know what? this is a problem, and I'm going to start a company, and we're going to fix this. We're going to work on this. I left the clinical bedside to start my first company because of a problem I saw right here at Prisma in the ER, in the children's ER. It was a revolving door for asthma patients, and I thought, well, this ain't right. When I worked in Arkansas at the Children's Hospital there, I helped to write a program, and so I knew already clinically what needed to be done. I just needed a little encouragement. So I think maybe there's some opportunity for us here and everyone in this room to just encourage a lady who might be interested in starting a company. But I think also resources and understanding how to tap resources is really, really imperative to women founders. I go back to my early days, and one of my first helpers was a consultant from the SBDC, and Earl Gregorich has been just instrumental in helping me to understand personally how to build a company. What kind of company do you want to build, Amanda? What's your mission? Is this a solopreneur? Are you going to bring on a partner? Are you going to what's your structure? And let me connect you again to resources. So just understanding and helping ladies to, number one, take the first step, and then connecting them to another group of women would be really helpful. But I'm in a different phase now, and I'm in the funding phase. And so I will tell you that raising venture capital or seed round, Series A, all of those fun things that we talk about is really, really intimidating. And I can tell you that as a woman, only 2% of VC angel funds actually go to women founders. So I've pitched, and I've pitched, and I've pitched, and I'm tired. But we're close to closing our seed round right now, which is really encouraging. But I think just how do we break some of those barriers down? I think, number one, we need to bring more women founders into the fold and just kind of walk alongside them. As a woman, I have different social responsibilities, both to my family, my children, and then again to my employees and my partners. And so what does that look like, and how do you teach and mentor that? So that's something I'm very interested in kind of moving forward.
That's a great point. So those of you who are women founders out there, be heartened. We need you. So please seek Amanda out. She's a great example. We have another young lady who wasn't able to be with us, Laura Bokenfuso, as well. So I hope that you'll do that.
Laura's a great mentor of mine. I love her.